Hi, ladies and gentlemen. In this meeting, I'd like to talk about my book, Bronze Age America. It deals with a voyage made by a Scandinavian king, we think, about 1700 years ago, 1700 years before Christ, from Scandinavia to the St. Lawrence Riverway to a point somewhere near where Toronto now stands, and there he established a trading settlement at what is now called Peterborough in Ontario. He brought cloth, apparently, from Europe to trade with the Algonquian Indians, and from then he obtained copper ingots rather like this one you see here. They originate in the Copper Peninsula on the shores of Lake Superior, and we know that they were mined by the Algonquians 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. There are about 5,000 vacant mines now left on the Copper Peninsula, and millions of pounds of copper were removed from them by the Indians, and nobody could figure out where they'd gone. The professors at the Michigan School of Mines produced this book about these ancient copper mines and speculated that perhaps Egyptians had come and taken the copper away. The archaeologists had nothing to say about the matter. Copper, not very much copper, is found in the remains of the Indians of that period. The mounds don't contain very much copper. What happened to the millions of pounds of copper that were taken out at that time? Carbon dated, as I said, to 2,000 to 3,000 BC. We think that our finds at the site in Peterborough give the explanation. They were obtained by visitors from abroad, from Scandinavia, and the copper was taken to Europe and there converted into the Bronze Age tools of that period. And in return they brought woven cloth, little of which has survived, though occasionally we do find pieces impregnated with copper salts in the graves of the Indians of that period. The camera has been roaming over a general view of the site at Peterborough, and so you'll see what kind of a place it is. It's a flat, or almost flat, gently rolling area of limestone with hundreds of petroglyphs carved into it, and also, as we shall see, a great deal of ancient Nordic writing. Many of us are familiar already with the presence of people from Scandinavia in historic times. The tower that you see in this picture is in Rhode Island, and we think it was built as a church by one of the Norse bishops around 1200 AD. We have a whole series of letters written by the popes in Rome to these Norse bishops in Greenland and in parts of the USA. Here is a portion of an inscription which some of you may have heard about before. It's located in Kensington, in Minnesota, and it's engraved on a large rectangular slab of stone and gives a description of how a group of traders from Sweden, Goths from Sweden, were waylaid by a party of Indians, and some of them were killed. This is an event that occurred during the 13th century AD. But what we have to speak about today is of a far earlier period. Excuse me. In one of my other talks, I've spoken about Bronze Age structures called dolmens. Here is one of those that I mentioned in that talk, which is in Sweden today. It's the type that most closely resembles the dolmens in North America. And here is an American twin matching that one in Sweden we just saw. This one's in New York State. Both the one in Sweden and the one we see now in New York have capstones of about 90 tons. They date, as you know, from the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Bronze Age, and that is to say they're about contemporary with these Nordic visitors that we are postulating came here around 1700 BC. That's long before the Vikings of historic times. And here is another view of that same dolmen in New York, showing the supporting stones holding the great capstone up. So this is the period we're talking about. And here's another one in New England, Lynn, Massachusetts. The period we're speaking about is when these structures had been in existence for not many centuries. At that time, at the close of the Stone Age, men in Europe, people in Europe, were beginning to learn how to mould copper into useful tools, and some had even learned how to blend it with other metals, to melt it and blend it with other metals to produce bronze. The characteristic tools of that period are like those you see illustrated on the screen. I have one here that was made, the one on the screen were made in Europe. Here is one that was made in North America at that time by people, Algonquians no doubt, in the Copper Peninsula of Michigan. This one is made of hammered copper. The copper was taken out of the rock with hammerstones and the vein of copper removed like that, and then heated and laboriously hammered into this form. Not melted, but just hammered. Here's another example. And these are ingots washed out by the action of the great glaciers during the Ice Age, tore out chunks of copper and then dropped them in the lakes, great lakes like Lake Superior in particular, where scuba divers find them today. We think these were the materials that the American Indians were trading with their visitors from Scandinavia. Some of the other tools they made, you see an ingot in the center of this group, and some of the other tools that they made are represented around it, spearheads and arrowheads of various sizes, closely resembling those that were being produced in Europe at the same time. And here are other examples. These are American ones made from hammered copper. We know that the copper was hammered and not melted because it's characteristic of American copper that it contains granules of silver, and the silver can still be seen in these tools, not blended with the copper, so we know it was just hammered and not melted. If they had been melted, the silver would of course dissipated into the rest of the melt. Some years ago, a visitor, an archaeologist visiting USA from Denmark, saw in the collection of the American Indian Museum in New York the bronze axe that you see illustrated here in two views, and recognized it immediately as something that had been made in Scandinavia. It's a typical Scandinavian Bronze Age tool. And he wrote a little article, as you can see reproduced here, Bronzealderens Columbus. He's saying, was there a Columbus in the Bronze Age? How did the Scandinavian material get to North America? His guess was, I believe, quite correct. Now we're going to look at some closer shots of the site in Peterborough in Ontario, where, as you can see, there are representations of tools and weapons engraved in the surface of the limestone. You see a couple of daggers there. This is rather characteristic of that site. Weapons are illustrated many times over. There you see some spearheads and what looks like a hammer, a square hammer or a mallet. We think that these were carvings made by Algonquian Indians copying other work that had been done by the Scandinavian visitors. In this view you can see a square mallet or hammer on one side, and in the middle of the picture is a picture of a ship. You may think it's a rather strange looking ship, but that's the way the Scandinavians used to illustrate the ships during the Bronze Age. As we afterwards learned when we studied the site, the square mallet you see there is an Indian copy of a picture elsewhere on the site showing the thunder god Thor holding his thunder-producing hammer called Mjolnir. And here are more weapons. These large pictures of weapons, we think, were not drawn by the Scandinavian visitors, but by Algonquians who were interested in the weapons that the Scandinavian visitors brought. This is a large area of limestone that's been engraved. We find in Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden, large, almost flat areas of limestone, very similar to that we have in Ontario. And it, too, in Sweden, carries engravings of pictures of things that the Scandinavians were doing at that time. This is nearly 2,000 years before Christ. Here we have a very interesting one. It shows what is called the sun ship. The Scandinavian peoples and many other peoples during the Bronze Age believed that the sun crossed the sky every day on his ship. In this picture we see the ship with its steering rudder hanging below and a tall mast in the middle which carries the image of the sun and some other object on another mast nearby. The ship crossed the sky from east to west every day and then travelled underneath the earth back to the east again to travel the next day. The Canadian archaeologists who first studied these things before I had the opportunity to study them could not help but notice the similarity to the Scandinavian inscriptions and were considerably puzzled by that fact, but they couldn't conceive that Scandinavians had come to America before Columbus, so they supposed them to be an independent invention on the part of the Algonquians. Here are more views of Scandinavian ships at the site in Canada, at Peterborough, and you'll notice rows of dots between the ships. Actually, this is a form of writing in which letters of the alphabet are made up by combinations of dots. And those dots, as we shall see later on, are actually giving the names of the ships there, Scandinavian names of the visiting ships. A record of the visit by King Woden-Lithie. Here is another characteristically Scandinavian picture of a ship. That's the way they represented the rowers, as like matchstick figures with heads at different heights, and some dominating captain or somebody standing on the left-hand side of the vessel. These are all at the Peterborough site in Scandinavia. And there are more ships visible in this view, and also some human figures. Some of the figures we think were added by the American Indians afterwards. In the lower part of that picture you'll see two things looking like the letter T, and there's a ship in between them drawn sideways. The two objects looking like the letter T we believe are copies made by the American Indians of Thor's hammer, the hammer of the thunder god whom the Scandinavians worshipped. And here are yet more ships. I'm just showing this series of shots from the site so you can get the general idea of what it's like. The government of the province of Ontario has declared this site a provincial park and has protected the whole petroglyph site from damage by weather or by vandals. Here are some Scandinavian ships represented as they are seen in Scandinavia, in Sweden today, with one of the symbols of their alphabet above, the circle with a cross in it. It seems that whole fleets of ships were traversing the waters around Scandinavia excuse me, during the Bronze Age. And this is a grouping of petroglyphs carved in limestone in a place called Bohuslän in Sweden, showing one of these fleets of Scandinavian ships with the writing, which we call tifinag, made of dots scattered amongst the petroglyphs. There are hundreds of carvings of Scandinavian ships from this period, and we can't help but realize that the waters of Scandinavia must have been very busy with whole fleets of seagoing people so long ago. Look in the middle of this picture and you'll see what look like pairs of footprints or pairs of shoe prints. That's what they are. And for a long time they puzzled us. But we now realize that these are forms of, let me think, what's the word they used for them? They're forms of writing in which you use other pictures of other things that sound like what you want to say. Rebus, it's called a rebus. You make up pictures from various elements, and if you say what you see and then think carefully, you're realizing that what you're saying sounds like something else, which is what the message really is about. These are prayers to the god of the sea to protect the fleet. Strange way of writing a prayer, but that's what it turned out to be. Now, here are some of the remarkable features of the petroglyphs site in Ontario compared with corresponding ones in Sweden. To the left, we have a dancer dressed as a bird, perhaps an eagle, a dancer, as represented at Peterborough. And on the right, you have virtually the same thing as represented by a dancer engraved of a dance, I should say, engraved in the limestone at Bohuslän in Sweden. Apparently, in Sweden, they were doing the same things as people were doing in Canada at that date, about 1700 BC. Here are some more dancers. We don't know exactly what they're doing. The one on the left, as we see him, is Peterborough. Perhaps they're acrobats, maybe. And the one on the right is a very similar dancer represented in the rock in Bohuslän in Sweden. As I mentioned earlier, the Canadian archaeologists who first studied this site in the 1970s were aware of some of these similarities to the petroglyphs of Scandinavia and were greatly puzzled, but they just could not conceive that there could have been a visit by people from Scandinavia to Canada so long ago, and so they were forced to guess that peoples on either side of the Atlantic were mysteriously inventing the same ideas simultaneously. Here we have pictures of what we know now is a god holding up greatly enlarged hands. Actually, it's the god, a god who had a great glove called Glothy, and his name was Thunor, or as the Scandinavians say, Thor, the god of thunder. These are as represented in Sweden. Here we have the same god depicted in Canada at Peterborough. The god Thor, with his giant glove Glothy, showing on the right-hand side, and on the left he's just dropped his hammer, the hammer that makes the lightning and thunder. And here's another representation of the thunder god. He's wearing a conical helmet, as he sometimes also does in Sweden. This is in Canada, however, and he's holding his hammer again. Thunor or Thor. Thunor seems to have been the word used by the people who came to Canada around 1700 BC. Now, what had been overlooked until I had the privilege of beginning to study at this site was that there are several types of writing present on this set of engravings. The one you see there is the kind we call Ogham. In another talk I gave on dolmens, we mentioned Ogham, which we see engraved on some of the dolmens. Here is the whole alphabet, and you see that you have a horizontal stroke, or sometimes it's written vertically, and smaller strokes on either side, either above or below, or if the main stroke is written vertically, then smaller strokes on the left or the right. And according to the number and according to which side of the horizontal line they're placed, you have a different letter represented. Or if the strokes cross both sides, as at the bottom, transcript strokes, then we have yet another series of letters. That's Ogham. And surprisingly, we find Ogham at the Peterborough site, I should say. Evidently the Scandinavians were aware of Ogham. It's not just something that the Celts used. The Scandinavians had it too. Here's another kind of writing called Tifinag. We have a picture of a ship, and at one end there's a vertical stroke. At the right-hand end there's a vertical stroke. In the middle you see where it says M, a stroke in the shape of a crescent moon, and at the left-hand end a circular marking labelled R. The vowels were missing from this alphabet. They only wrote the consonants, and the word is RMN, to be pronounced Ormen, and it means literally the worm. But in those days the word worm, or orm as it is in Norse, was used for sea serpents and dragons, and this is telling us the name of a ship. This is engraved in Scandinavia, and it's a picture of one of their great seagoing vessels called the Dragon, Ormen. The N at the end is the definite article, the. It's characteristic of Norse that the article, the, is put at the end of a word instead of at the beginning. We say the worm, they say worm the. Here's another one, also in a Scandinavian site, Swedish site, and it has the letters D. You see at the bottom an upside down V, that's the letter D. Then we have a circle, that's the R that we've just seen in the other petroglyph. Then a circle with a dot in it, that's an S, and then two small dots side by side, that's an L. And we read it from right to left. It's DRSL, Drasil, which is a favourite name given to ships by the Norsemen. It means steed or horse, and the Norsemen liked to think of their ships as horses that rode across the sea. Even in Viking times, 3,000 years later, they still used that formula, Drasil. And here is the whole alphabet set out for you. You see 1 dot for A, 2 for L, 3 strokes for L as an alternative way of writing L, and so on. I won't go through the whole alphabet for you, but that is the Tifinagh alphabet, found in Scandinavia and also at Norse sites in Canada. This is an ancient alphabet that preceded the runes of historic times and is much older. We can see here we can form here some idea of how the letters got their names. They resemble, for example, look at that crescent on the left-hand side, the third one down from the top, a crescent. That's the letter M, and it stands for the Norse word man, meaning moon. They took the first sound in the object which these symbols are supposed to represent, and that gave the letter for you. Should you wish to learn more about this system than we can conveniently talk about in a lecture like this, this book, Bronze Age America, is one place where you will find the alphabet set out and explained in detail, and another place where you can find them are the publications of the Epigraphic Society, which repeatedly explain these things. To my great interest, after my book was published, the Canadian schools began to take an interest in what I had found, and one of the teachers, Raymond Beaumont in Winnipeg, has issued these leaflets for his fellow teachers to use in teaching the Canadian children about this wonderful site at Peterborough. The instructions in these leaflets include the one which you see in the slide now, explaining to the Canadian school children how this writing works. You can't imagine how pleased I was when I realized that our work was now being made known to the younger generation of Canadians. I hope the same thing will happen in the USA. I'm surely grateful to Mr. Beaumont for what he's doing. There's more examples of pictures from his publications. He's taken the illustrations from Bronze Age America and presented them in a form easily understood by children. In this particular example from his leaflet, it comes from this one, in this particular example we're looking, he shows how the word bull, which is a word that the English language shares also with the Norse language, BL, is represented there, and cow, which is vag in Scandinavian, WG, is there. And then on the right-hand side, he shows a picture of a sun god whose name is Sol, the same word as in Latin for sun. The old Scandinavian word was Sol. He's holding up the letters SL, spelling his name. This is a very early form of writing, and it's so interesting that school children now are once again learning it. I mentioned earlier there are many pictures of the ships of King Woden Lithi at his site, and they have their names written beside them. One of the ones there, for example, you can see KGH, Kog. That's a very well-known name of a type of ship used by the Norsemen in historic times. And to our surprise, we find that same name was used for the ships back in the Bronze Age, cog. There are 3 different names for different kinds of ships that we find in these Peterborough inscriptions. A very interesting demonstration of how long a knowledge of the sea and knowledge of seafaring has been present amongst the Scandinavian peoples. Now I'll come to how we found out what the site is all about. The first part of the inscription, as we gradually worked out the different pieces and figured out what they were saying, we learned that the man who initiated the whole thing was a king of a town in Norway, which still exists, called Ringerike, and his name is represented on the site by WDNLITH. And Woden or Woden Lithi. In modern Scandinavian that would be Odin. We say Woden in English. The Germans, as you know, say Wotan, the father god. And Woden Lithi means servant of Woden. He was the great king Stor Konungur, it says, of Ringerike, a town in Norway. And the last part says Quaid Rune Gneidd. He gave orders that the runes should be engraved. Here we have a picture of the man in the middle, that's the king, and below it you see 3 hieroglyphs. The one on the lower left is a ring of office, called Hringerite in Norse. Then below him is a bird, evidently a stork, and the word in Scandinavian is the same as in English, storker, and the picture on the side is a ship, Nogwe, one of the types of ship called Nogwe. If you put together those 3 words, you get a rebus, a kind of a puzzle picture, Ringar Storka Nogwe, which is as close as you can get to Ringerike Stor Konungr, of Ringerike, the great king. And then no, I haven't quite finished it. Above that are the letters of the alphabet, spelling his name, WDNLTH, you see there, Woden Lithi, and then Rune RN on the upper right-hand side, the runes, and then on the left hand at the top, KWD, Quaid, gave orders, and then in the middle on the left, GND, Gneidd, gave orders to engrave. Woden Lithi, the great king of Ringerike, gave orders to engrave these runes. Runes, as you know, is the old word for secret writing. So that way, from this part of the inscription, we found out who it was that had led the expedition and how the inscription came to be made. Next thing we wanted to know is what were they doing here? And we learned that from this part of the inscription. On the left, I'm not going to go into all these details, but I think you can see now how we read them. We find out the letters and then find the Old Norse words that they correspond to. The left-hand side, he tells us that the spear of the god Woden, or Odin, had the name Gungnir, and the spear is illustrated at the top left, Gungnir. And then he goes on to say, that was the name of my ship, the Gungnir, the spear of Woden. So now we know the name of the first ship that crossed the Atlantic, or the first ship we know about, that crossed the Atlantic so long ago to America. On the right-hand side, he tells us why he came here. It was to trade cloth for ingots of copper. The thing like a bone at the top on the right is the way copper was represented in the old days as a copper ingot. A comb in the middle, kam, is the word we have in English, came. You can use, if you want to say I came, you can draw a picture of a comb. One of the things that Woden Lithi did while he was staying here, he stayed here about 7 months, he set up an astronomical observatory for his settlers, whom apparently he left behind when he sailed back to Scandinavia. He left some trading settlers behind, and they wanted to be able to celebrate the great festivals of the Scandinavian calendar year at the correct time when their people back home were doing it. So to enable them to do that, he left this observatory engraved on the site at Peterborough with the image of the sun god in the middle there, laid so that it points towards the direction. You see it on the lower right. That is actually the southeast, like a compass. It's pointing to the direction where the sun will rise on the midday winter festival around the 25th of December, when they held the festival called Yule, from which we inherit Christmas. That was his observatory. I won't try to say more about it here because in the space of a 1-hour lecture you can't deal with every detail. This is a very interesting portion of the Peterborough inscription, which tells us something of the knowledge of the heavens that the ancient people had at that time. This is a portion of a zodiac which he has engraved, and apparently it corresponds to the part we would call the ram. The bear shown on the left-hand side, that corresponds to what we call the ram. Then we say the bull, and he's engraved an elk, and he's written the word LG there, elg for elk. Then we have on the right-hand side the heavenly twins and the crab. So he's got the ram, the bull, the heavenly twins, and next the crab, the lion stands, and so on. The 12 signs of the zodiac. Now the interesting thing he has to impart to us from this picture, there's more of a zodiac, but I'm not going to spend time illustrating the whole of it. The interesting thing for, please don't take it away. The interesting thing about the zodiac is that you'll see below a sign WG, vague, which means the balance. And that was the word we believe that was used for the word for equinox, the balance of day and night. And he's telling us that the equinox occurs when the sun is midway between the bear and the elk, or as we would say, between the ram and the bull. Now that's not the state today. Nowadays the sun's in a different position at the time of the equinox, but we do know that around 1700 BC, that was where the sun was at the time of the equinox. And this is how I think the inscription is to be dated. He's telling us his period with this diagram. It's interesting that that date corresponds quite well with a time when we know the mining for copper was occurring in the Copper Peninsula. We can date the Copper Peninsula mines by the remains of a charcoal found in the bases of the mine shafts. They give us a carbon date corresponding quite well with Woden-Lithie's date. Here is a picture of his sun god enlarged. You notice the rays around the sun itself are a varying length, and they actually spell the word sol. Here again we see the sun ship with the sun on the mast in the middle. The Canadian archaeologists, when they first noticed the close similarity to the Scandinavian sun ship, wondered how it was that the American Indians could have thought up the same idea, but nonetheless that's what they thought they did. And they reported that there was a line of dots, a curved line of dots to the left-hand side of the picture. They did not realize that this is part of the Tifinagh alphabet. And what it is saying there is that it's the ship of the glowing standard, ship of a burning standard. That's the sun. This is another part of the observatory left by Woden-Lithie. This one is giving us the name of the goddess of the moon. The varying lengths of the strokes around the disk of the moon are the Ogham letters, which give the old Scandinavian name of the moon, and tells us that it was used for measuring the months. These peculiar figures puzzled us a bit for a while, but we gradually came to realize that they are the Yule men, the clowns who celebrated the winter festival. Men dressed up as animals. Sometimes they're upside down, which suggests that they may have been acrobats. Here are some more Yule men, including one that's upside down. Apparently mummers celebrating the winter festival. Gungnir, I mentioned the name of the great spear of the god Woden earlier. Here is a representation of it again, spelt out N-G-N-R. We think that perhaps it might have been pronounced in those days Ungungnir, maybe. It's Gungnir in historic times. That was the name of Woden-Lethe's ship. Here we have a picture of, as the writing tells us, a monstrous wolf that features in Scandinavian mythology. In in historic times, it was referred to as the Fenris wolf. Here we find it WNR, as if the F had been preceded by a W sound in the Bronze Age, something like Wenry or Wenris maybe, but it's obviously the same as the Fenris wolf of historic times, a giant wolf which attacked the gods of Valhalla. Can we have the next slide, please? There was a writhing serpent showing above the wolf too. That was another one of the beasts that attacked the gods. The letters here tell us that the human form, represented in the middle with only one arm, is actually the god Siu. Siu was the god of war and also the god who protected ships at sea. So we have his symbol, a trading ship, to the right, and his name spelt out beneath him with TZW, Siu. And a wolf, again, it's the Fenris wolf, shown to the left-hand side. He has, you see, only one hand. The other one is dripping blood. The wolf has just bitten off and swallowed his hand. That is part of the Scandinavian mythology, that the Fenris wolf attacked the gods, and Siu, the god of war, came out and defended the other gods, but sacrificed his hand in so doing. How interesting that these myths are so old that they go back to the Bronze Age and engraved on the rocks for us to see. Here are some representations of the god Thor, as we know him from historic mythology, but he's called Thunor in these inscriptions. That's another word for thunder. The thunder god who is destroying serpents of Middle Earth. On the left side, you see his hammer, looking like the letter T there. On the right-hand side, there are several more representations of his hammer, together with the name of the hammer. We know that the Norsemen of historic times said that Thor carried a magic hammer called Mjolnir. Each, swords and things had individual names in those days. This particular hammer was called Mjolnir, and we see there the name MLNR written in the consonants of its name. Several representations of it, and he's also holding a Mjolnir and wearing his conical helmet, as he sometimes does in Scandinavian pictures of him, but these are Canadian pictures. Well, I published my work in 1982, I think it was, in Bronze Age America, this book that I'm holding. And after the information in it became known in Scandinavia, a Danish historian, Jon Galster, came to North America and visited the site and studied the inscriptions and came to the conclusion that I had interpreted them correctly. And he then wrote a book in the Danish language, which was published by the Danish Historical Textbooks Society, Hilleristningernes Tale, which is a Danish phrase meaning the story of the rock inscriptions in Norden av Amerika, in the northern countries and in America. And you see a picture of the sun god, portion of the sun god. His book is this one, published in the Danish language. Unfortunately, few people in North America read Danish, so that not many people know that a Danish scientist came in and confirmed my work. He also made some corrections, for which I'm grateful. That is Jon Galster. If we could see the next slide, please, I'll indicate the interesting correction he made. I did not know much about the Norse legend of a tree called Yggdrasil. I knew the name. I knew that there was a magic tree or world tree called Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, but I didn't know what it was like. And I saw the word Ugdrasil, meaning, as I thought, ugly steed. You remember we found Drasil earlier on as the name of a ship, a steed or a horse? I thought this was spelling ugly horse. And because of the similarity of the Yggdrasil to the Yggdrasil of Scandinavian mythology, I concluded that it was the name of this tree, and that the strange object on the right-hand side must apparently be a picture of a tree with only two branches and apparently a sun or a moon shining over the top of it. I thought perhaps the inscription had been damaged and the other branches had been lost. We could see the next slide, please. We'll see now what the Danish investigator made of it. He first of all pointed out that Yggdrasil is the old Saxon way of pronouncing Yggdrasil, and it doesn't mean ugly steed. Ugarus is an old word, an alternative name of Odin, or Woden, and it means Woden's horse. The story being that Woden periodically sacrificed himself to himself by hanging himself from this tree, the magic tree of Yggdrasil. Very strange story. And on the right-hand side, Dr. Galster has shown us a picture of a carving, a monument to Yggdrasil that existed in the town called Lippe in northern Europe until about the 8th century, the exact date I can't remember, about something like 750 AD, when Charlemagne, or Karl den Store as the Danes call him, when Charlemagne came to this pagan site and destroyed it. That's a picture of the monument to Yggdrasil as it was at that time. You see, there are two branches. It is not so different from the picture at Peterborough after all. After we had published our respective books, I continued to look into the petroglyphs of North America, this time alerted to seek Scandinavian similarities. And the series of slides I'm going to show you now show some of the later findings we made. The figures, they don't have any letters with them, so we don't really know what they represent. We published these findings in this volume of the Epigraphic Society that I'm holding, and I'm going to show you some of the slides taken from the pictures in this volume now. We found that both at Peterborough and at sites in North America and sites in Scandinavia, we had what looked like sun figures with a pair of legs. We also found them, as you see on the upper right, sun figures with heads and legs and carrying a sword, apparently. The next slide, please. Here are some more of these figures that seem to be representing the sun, or maybe just warriors carrying circular shields. In each case, the members of a pair are one in Bohuslän, Sweden, and one in North America. We have pairs of Scandinavian and American matching pairs here. They're found in different parts of North America. They're not all in Canada. Some of them are in different parts of the USA. But it seems as if Scandinavian visitors were penetrating almost all over the continent. Perhaps they were traders using canoes for going from one river system to another, and leaving behind these pictures of their divinities as they were in Scandinavia. Here's another example. I had mentioned earlier on how you find pairs of shoes or shoe imprints over ships. We think these are ways of representing by hieroglyphs prayers to the gods to protect ships. This is explained in more detail in my book. I won't try to go into it here because it involves reference to too many Norse words. But that's what we think the pair of shoes over a ship indicates. This is one in Scandinavia. Now here's one in Colorado. We're going to see one in Colorado, a ship represented much the same way as it is in Scandinavia. Instead of pairs of shoes, we have footprints, probably representing the same thing. A prayer for protection of a ship. These are Scandinavian pictures of ships with what are usually taken to be acrobats performing evolutions over the ship. We don't yet know what it really means. I suspect that it's a rebus, and that if you say the right words, you're going to get another prayer for the protection of a ship. But whatever it is, the characteristic feature is that somebody that looks like an acrobat is performing some evolution over one end of a ship. These are in Scandinavia. Now, look at this one. This is in Colorado. A picture of a ship very much like the Scandinavian versions of what ships are like. And here's an acrobat performing something or other over one end of a ship. That must surely have been engraved by a Scandinavian visitor. Another strange series of pictures we find in Scandinavia. Some kind of a mysterious hand projecting upwards from a ship. It must be some rebus asking for the protection of the gods of that ship. A hand is drawn over the ship. That's the Scandinavian picture. We haven't found a picture like that in North America yet, but just to indicate how the Scandinavians got around, here is one from the Middle East. It must be a Scandinavian ship with the same strange hand projecting above it. And this is a really curious one at Bohuslän, Sweden. A ship or ships, we don't know whether one or two ships are represented in this picture, beside an enormous bird at one end. And we can pretty well figure out what that rebus is saying. If you pronounce the words in Old Norse, a great bird has waded alongside two ships. It sounds very much like some other Norse words that mean, may Odin the mighty gods protect the ships, or bring the ships back. So it's a prayer for the safe return of the ships. It doesn't look like that, but I think that's what it means. A giant bird standing beside the ships. Now, look at this example from Texas. Inexplicable when it was first found, but how similar it is to the Norse one. I think that this is a Texan example of that same prayer of a Norse ship showing with a giant bird wading beside it. A great bird has waded alongside the ship, and may Odin the mighty guide the ship, is probably what it's saying. Well, these are just ramblings into the petroglyphs of North America looking for Norse parallels, and they're not part of Bronze Age America, but they are published in our series of publications, the publications of the Epigraphic Society. I bring my talk to an end there because that tells you the point we've gotten to in our work. We're still looking for more Scandinavian parallels, but we do now realize that there were contacts between North America and the people of Scandinavia nearly 2,000 years before Christ. Thank you.
Dr. Phil, thank you very much for sharing that wonderful information. Where might people obtain more information or continue their study in this?
One of the easiest ways of getting information right now is the new edition of America BC has added a chapter on the Woden-Lithia material. That's about the easiest way to get it. That's in pocketbooks. The original book, Bronze Age America, unfortunately is out of print at the moment, though we hope to bring it back into print. And for the most up-to-date summary of archaeologists' views on the site, the spring 1990 issue of Review of Archaeology, published by the Peabody Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, gives the archaeologist's view of the site now. It can be obtained for about $8 from the Peabody Museum, or we can help you if you can't find it.
And I notice here that out of Petersboro, we have Petersboro Experts, called book by Professor, quote, stark raving nonsense. Well, I'm afraid I would have to disagree with those that would say this, and I want to congratulate you again on your work, wonderful work, and would you like to comment on this article?
Of course, I learned from this and also from similar experiences with other books that one necessary tool you have to have when you're engaged on this kind of work is the hide of a rhinoceros, as you get every kind of brickbat thrown at you. But that's the way it is when you're changing something that's been an established form of history for a long time. You have to put up with a lot of objections.
Well, and could you tell us a little bit about Aesop and how that people might acquire
Sure.
these works?
Aesop is a volume we publish each year. It has a coloured picture nowadays. Each year it has about 350 pages, and it costs about $32.50 to buy it. We sell it from the Society's headquarters. Will you be giving the address when
Yes, we certainly will be.
And each volume deals with a selection of articles, but one that would particularly interest your viewers would be the series beginning with this one, volume 15, which deals with the Kensington Stone. Articles by Dr. Richard Nielsen of the University of Copenhagen in Denmark has discussed the whole structure and the letters and every grammar and every detail you can find of the Kensington Stone in Minnesota, which tells the story of a party of Swedes who were waylaid by Algonquian Indians in the, I forget whether it was 13th or 14th century, but it was before Columbus.
Yes, 1362, if I remember correct.
I forget now.
I have this entire collection in my library, Dr. Fell, and I treasure it, and I could not recommend it enough to anyone that wants to make a deep study. Thank God for teachers. You know, we have people that like to talk about subjects, but I hope you note how Dr. Fell has gone into detail by detail by detail, and then you would still have certain people that would come out with an article like this. I suppose if your credentials are the word threatened would certainly be too strong, but if you don't know, if you're ignorant of a subject, it's real easy to say, well, it's a fake or something of that nature, rather than delving into, researching, trying to understand the people, various peoples in their travel. Dr. Fell, I want to congratulate you on your many years of work and for bringing this knowledge forth and sharing it with the people. We congratulate you.
Well, Pastor Murray, I want to thank you for the facilities you're offering us to make it known to a much wider audience.
Well,
I've wanted this for years, and I'm so grateful that you're able to give it to us.
We're far better off for it, Dr. Fell, and it's been a pleasure being in your home and visiting with you on these subjects.
A pleasure to meet you all.
I just want to read, if I may, what the Reader's Digest had to say about America, B.C. Thank God people are beginning to wake up in our great nation. And I read, America, B.C., it has long been taken for granted that the first European visitors to American shores either sailed with Columbus in 1492 or may have been Norsemen like Leif Erikson a full 5 centuries earlier. But the history of our land before that date has so far remained lost in native Indian legends. Now, Harvard professor Barry Fell has uncovered evidence to replace those legends with myth-shattering fact. I repeat, fact. With illuminating text and over 100 pictures, he describes ancient European temple inscriptions from New England and the Midwest that date as far back as 800 BC. I repeat, 800 BC. He examines the phallic and other sexual-oriented structures found in our own country that reveal the beliefs of ancient Celtic fertility cults, cults that were virtually destroyed in Europe in early Christian times. Further evidence has been found in the tombs of kings and chiefs in the form of steles, written testimonies of grief carved in stone. Now, thanks to the genius of a single man, we must include in our American heritage fighting Celts from Spain and daring Semitic seafarers from Carthage, Libya, and Egypt. Who knows how many others will be added before the end of Barry Fell's epic voyage into the past. Comment by Reader's Digest. So I thank God for this man, Barry Fell, and his work and his generosity in sharing it with the American people. May we applaud him in his endeavors. And in our series, may there be many more, as the wisdom that God has granted this man through his hard work and field experience, that we see, know, and understand more about our country, that we're able to hear the rock speak to us through the communications portrayed there or left there by ancient travelers. Again, we thank Dr. Fell and his lovely lady for sharing their home, for our equipment, and sharing his knowledge on these things. We ask God's blessings on both of them, and may he send us more in the future, more men like Barry Fell.